welcome to the MAC webinar. This is an information session for those of you who kindly agreed to serve on a MAC as members or as chairs. This session is going to be overseen by me. I'm Sandra Zohar. I'm a Senior Programs Officer at the CFI, and my colleague Olivier Gagnon, who is Associate Director and is in charge of the Innovation Fund. And Olivier is going to be, my joke is Olivier will be on the keyboards today. He will take care of the Q&A channel. He will provide some immediate answers in real time, as well as save some of the questions for the Q&A period at the end of this session. The presentation will take about 25 minutes. We have a number of slides and some information that we would like to share with you that will help you prepare for the MAC meetings as well as participate in the MAC meetings. And we've allocated about an hour for a Q&A session. So we have plenty of time for discussion. I also want to encourage those of you who have served on MACs in the past, if you want to share your experience and your perspective during the Q&A session, that'll be fantastic. We would welcome your participation. I'm sorry your cameras are off, but your voices can be heard. We will use the Q&A channel for communicating, for posing questions, for replies, and communicating with each other. And you can also, at the end of the session, pose questions by raising your hand, and we can activate your, at least we can unmute you, and so we can hear your questions. I wanted to mention that we're recording this session, or we should be recording this session. So it will be available for those who attend and those who don't attend. We will post it on our YouTube channel probably in the next few weeks, as well as the deck will be available on the CFI's website. So I'll probably be mostly presenting or in presentation mode for the next 25 minutes or so. But if I'm going too fast, if you have a question of clarity that you think, maybe I should stop and address it right now rather than have a written response, by all means, we can make it interactive. Just let Olivier know, or either reply or to let me know that I'm going too fast, I'm going too slow. There is a matter of unclarity. By all means, please do let us know if all is going well with the presentation. So speaking of presentation, and without further ado, I see we have about 75 people online, so I think we can get started. So the agenda for today's meeting, I want to impart some information about the CFI. Many of you are familiar with the Canada Foundation for Innovation, but many of you are also new to the CFI. Give you some information about the 2023 Innovation Fund, then talk about the competition objectives, which are the criteria that you will be using for your assessment, and spend most of the time talking about the review process, what we should be doing before the MAC meeting between now and end of March, how to access the CFI online portal or the reviewers portal, and how the process will be carried out to the MAC meetings. And then we will, as I said, we have quite a bit of time available for a questions and answer period. The CFI, the Canada Foundation for Innovation's mandate is to increase the capability of Canada's universities, colleges, research hospitals, and nonprofit research organizations to carry out high-quality research by investing in research infrastructure. What sets the CFI somewhat apart from our other Canadian granting agencies is that we are exclusively for funding research infrastructure. Our clients, our stakeholders, are research institutions as outlined in the mandate, primarily universities and colleges, but also quite a few research hospitals and some nonprofit organizations. We fund across all areas of research, and the research that we fund, and you will see in the proposals that will be for the MAC review, we fund across a full gamut of fundamental research through to applied research and technology projects. We have a unique funding model whereby the CFI provides up to 40% of the infrastructure costs. So the CFI dollar is a 40-cent dollar, Canadian dollar at that. And the institutions have to find the additional 60%. And they do that through a variety of means. Usually, most provinces will match the CFI funding. So that's the other 40%. And the additional 20% is usually through a mix of in-kind contributions and cash contributions from suppliers, from research foundations or hospital foundations, and institutional contributions. I said that we fund exclusively research infrastructure, but we also provide some operating and maintenance funds through what we call the Infrastructure Operating Fund, the IOF. So every CFI funded project automatically receives 30% of the CFI amount, which means 30% of the 40% of IOF funding to help with the sustainability and operating and maintenance of the research infrastructure. This, as I said, it's automatic contribution and does not need to be approved, but you will see IOF come up quite a bit. In the proposals, we ask about sustainability, and the IOF component certainly is a very important one for at least the short-term operations of all CFI projects. So let's talk about the 2023 Innovation Fund. For this competition, as for the 2020 Innovation Fund, these are competitions that we run regularly every 2.5 to 3 years. So our budget for this competition is $400 million for capital costs and $120 million for IOF, that is the O&M component. So it's we have $520 million for this competition. How far will those $520 million go? Well, for this competition, we received 297 proposals from 63 institutions from across Canada. And the total CFI amount requested is nears $1.1 billion. As such, we're looking at about a 36% funding rate. The success rate remains to be determined, but the funding rate is about 36%. I wanted to spend a bit of time going over the CFI's competition objectives for the Innovation Fund competition. And these are important because these lay the foundation for how you will be assessing the proposals that you will be reviewing. And we have 3 overarching objectives. 1, to enable internationally competitive research or technology development through equitable participation of expert committee members. So we are looking for projects that are not just really good ideas, but ones that have a strong potential to be internationally competitive, whether they're research or technology development projects or ones that combine both aspects. And we're looking for teams that have expertise as well as equitable and inclusive, that are equitable and inclusive, and or at least plan to put in processes to make them so. Second criterion is to enhance and optimize the capacity of institutions and research communities to conduct the proposed research or technology development programs over the useful life of the infrastructure. So what this objective embodies is the infrastructure that is being requested. These are infrastructure projects. Most of them are in the millions of dollars. So is the infrastructure that is being requested ideal? Is it appropriate? Will it optimize the capacity of the teams, of the institutions, and also the research communities through the collaborations and partners of these projects over the useful life of the infrastructure? And that's important because we want to make sure that the infrastructure is sustainable in the short and the long term. The last objective, and that is embedded in all of the CFI funding programs, is that the projects will lead to social, health, environmental, and or economic benefits for Canadians. So these investments have to eventually, whether in the short or longer term, be of benefits to Canadians. They don't have to be of the whole suite of benefits, but they must be of benefit to Canadians. And of course, it's even better if they're of benefit to globally, not just to Canadians. Our competition and merit review process are displayed in this figure. So we have a three-stage review process, which is why things take a little longer for the Innovation Fund reviews than smaller projects. The proposals were due in July 2022, and as I said, we received 297 proposals. We've been running the expert committee review process since September, and we are almost at the tail end of this process. We've had about 70 expert committee meetings. The expert committees, as the name indicates, are committees that are have experts in the research domains of the proposals. They review the proposals based on 6 assessment criteria, and they look at strengths and weaknesses for each of the assessment criteria. Expert committees do not make funding recommendations. The second stage of the review process is that of the MAC review, the Multidisciplinary Assessment Committees. And as you know, this review will take place towards the end of March. And the MAC reviews the proposals based on the 3 competition objectives that we just described. They do a few other things. In addition to reviewing the proposals, being guided by the expert committee reports based on the objectives, we'll also task the MACs to look at the team composition criterion, and I will go into further details later on in the presentation. We ask the MAC to identify projects that are of high excellence, and as well as up to two proposals in each competition or in each MAC that are of exceptional merit. The MACs also make funding recommendations, and that's another feature that sets them apart from the expert committee review. We will have 13 MACs, 13 committees that will review about 200 and maybe 50 proposals. So we expect, as has happened in every EIF competition we have had over the past, that the MAC recommendations of projects for funding will exceed the available envelope of $400 million. And as such, we strike the next level of review, which is the special MAC. And it is the SMAC's mandate to look at all the projects that were recommended by the 13 MACs for funding, make sure that they align with the CFI's mandate and the competition objectives, and recommend a portfolio of investments that will be recommended for ultimate funding. So basically, the SMAC will look at all the proposals or all the projects recommended for funding by the MAC, will select from among them those that are of the highest merit that will fall within the $400 million envelope, and will make funding recommendations to the CFI's board of directors. The SMAC will meet in May, and the board of directors will meet in June 2023 and will make the final decisions for the projects that will be funded through the 2023 Innovation Fund competition. So a few things to do before the MAC. And we're going to be using the CFI's online portal or the reviewers portal to share all competition documents. Competition documents include the expert committee reports, proposals, various documents such as the MAC guidelines, a report template, quick reference guide, and so on. I've already received a couple of emails from you asking, where is my CHEMS activation email? And I appreciate that you're very eager to start the review process. And we will have the MAC activation emails to you at the very latest February 6th. So we're looking to send you the activation info and the CHEMS information the first week of February. When you get access to the CHEMS, you will see to the CHEMS portal, you will see all the proposals assigned to your MAC. You'll find out the MAC that you're assigned to. And you will be assigned, as you already know from the invitation letters, you will each be assigned 10 proposals for review, in-depth review. We're assigning 3 MAC members for each of these reviews. And I want to flag from the get-go that these will undoubtedly be outside your area of expertise. At the MAC level, we're not looking for direct expertise for the review of the proposals. The expert review process has already taken place through the expert committee meetings, and you will have the reports to help guide you. So each proposal will be assigned to somebody who has health expertise or engineering expertise, social sciences expertise, or natural sciences expertise. We're looking for that multidisciplinary assessment perspective for each proposal. And that is important to recognize. And we know that sometimes MAC members say, but this is not an area I'm familiar with. And we know that. We invited you to serve on these committees because you have a broad background in research, in innovation, and bring that perspective to the MAC review. Also wanted to flag at this point that we are going to identify conflicts of interest to the best of our ability. Those will be based at least for Canadian MAC members. We will not assign you to any projects, of course, that come from your institution or which your institution is collaborating in. And you will be blocked from access to projects that are with which you're in conflict. However, if you identify additional conflicts that we did not identify, we ask you that you please let us know as soon as possible, especially if you were assigned as reviewer for one of these proposals, so that we can reassign them to somebody else. During your review, how are you going to do it? Where will you find the information? This slide shows the alignment between the 3 competition objectives that the MAC will be conducting its review upon and the 6 assessment criteria that are the framework of the proposals as well as the assessment of the expert committees. So when you're looking for information to inform your assessment of the objectives, you will be looking at the 3 criteria for objective 1, which are the research and technology development, the team expertise, and the team composition. For the second objective, it's primarily based on infrastructure and sustainability. And for the last objective, benefits, that's a direct translation to the benefits. There will be some overlap. We recognize that there's some overlap. It's not a 100% match, but it is close to it. So the information that you will need for your assessment is predicated on the information provided in the proposals and the expert committee reports as per these 6 assessment criteria. We also have an assessment scale, a rating scale, and it's we're going to ask you to use this 5-point scale for assessing each of the 3 objectives under review. And I'm going to take a few minutes going through this 5-point assessment scale because it is one that we have used in multiple competitions and used for all our funds. However, sometimes there might be some issues of understanding or misunderstanding. Satisfactory, SA, means that the proposal satisfies the competition objective. SA means it's excellent. It's met the assessment criteria as well, and in your case, the competition objective. But then there's the EX. X means that the proposal satisfies the objective, but exceeds it. So EX does not mean excellent, does not mean exceptional. It means it exceeds excellence. It exceeds fully satisfied. And so there will be projects that will merit the EX rating, but we ask you to use this EX judiciously. And if you do opt for the EX rating, that you provide us with a rationale of why does this project exceed satisfactory. We also have satisfactory, but with minor weaknesses. These are weaknesses that are not deal breakers, that they're sufficiently minor that they can be compensated for in the short or long term by the institutions, but are not so deep or significant that the proposal should not be considered for funding. So we consider SW, SA, and EX in the fundable range. If there are significant weaknesses in the project, then it should be a PS rating. And if the proposal does not satisfy the competition objectives, then you'll be called upon to use the not satisfied. And these are major weaknesses, not just a few significant ones. So we ask you throughout your review that recall that excellence is the main driver. When you assign ratings for the objective that you'll be assessing, we ask you not to average, and it becomes a little tricky. As you saw, the three objectives are such that the first one is based on 3 competition assessment criteria, the second one is based on 2 assessment criteria, and the last one on 1. So we ask that you don't average, you do a holistic review of each objective and assign a rating that is in keeping with your assessment of strengths and weaknesses of that objective and how the proposal meets that objective. I also wanted to point out that we had created a threshold of excellence for proposals, and projects that were found to have significant weaknesses that had PSs or NSs in them, a number of them, multiple significant or major weaknesses have been removed from competition and will not proceed for the MAC review phase. So before we move forward with the MAC review per se, I wanted to diverge a bit for a slide or two to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We integrated EDI into the 2023 Innovation Fund for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the recognition that diversity, whether it's gender, career stage, culture, and so on, underpins research excellence. This is not only CFI's observation. This has been proven time and time again that diversity is critical for excellence in research. Furthermore, we believe that an equitable, diverse, and inclusive culture is a responsibility of all of us, whether we are funders, institutions, researchers, experts, and reviewers. So we integrated EDI into the 2023 Innovation Fund in a couple of ways. First, we were strongly encouraged, in fact, we ask that all of you, if you have not already taken training in bias in peer review, that you please do so before the MAC. We will provide you with a link to this particular module. It's about 15 minutes. It's really interesting, and it is a common requirement for reviewers for all Canadian funders. And we introduced a new assessment criterion under team composition. And we also stated in our call for proposals that this assessment criterion must be satisfactory, must be assessed as satisfactory for the proposal to be considered for funding. So what is your role as the MAC in the assessment of the team composition criterion? And this is the only assessment criterion that will be reviewed on its own under certain circumstances. The criterion for team composition is that principles of equity and diversity were considered in the team composition, including in its leadership. There is a commitment to create an inclusive environment where all team members are fully integrated and supported in the research team. I want to mentioned that we developed this criterion in collaboration with stakeholders and with colleagues from other federal funding organizations. This requirement is embedded in the requirement for funding from all of our federal funding organizations. So none of these requirements are new to Canadian researchers. So they have experience. We have provided them with resources to provide examples and that fall under equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what basically we've asked them to do three things: to demonstrate EDI awareness, to demonstrate that the team has taken some steps towards implementing EDI processes, and to demonstrate that they will be taking further and concrete actions towards equitable and inclusive workplaces. I'm happy to say that the vast majority of our applicants took this requirement very seriously. We have not come across many proposals for which we have identified major weaknesses in this criterion, in the team composition criterion. However, there are some. For any proposal that received either partially satisfied or not satisfied ratings for the proposal, and regardless of how strong the project is, it may be fully satisfactory or exceeds in the other assessment criteria. We have said in the call for proposals that these projects will not be considered for funding. So we will flag projects with significant or major weaknesses to the MAC and ask that at the start of every review process, at the start of the MAC competition, you review these projects, and if you're in agreement with the expert committee that there are major weaknesses, that you vet these projects for removal from the competition. So what do you do to prepare for the competition and take part in the competition in the MAC process? So we're asking for your preliminary assessments to be inputted into CAMS, but first, of course, we need to give you access to CAMS. As I mentioned, we will send you CAMS activation the first week of February and ask you that you activate your account as quickly as possible. In CAMS, you will find all the documents, and you will also see that you've been assigned as either reader or reviewer to, as you'll be assigned as reviewer for 10 proposals and as reader for other 10 proposals. What do you do about the other proposals, the ones that you're assigned to as reader? We're not expecting an in-depth review for those. We recognize that time is limited, but in order to participate in all the MAC conversations, we hope that all MAC members will be at least familiar with the proposal and have read the expert committee reports and the 3-page project summary that is available in each proposal. So once you're in CAMS, you will find the name of your committee. You will be associated with a MAC. You go into the MAC, and under your review tab, you will have a list of the projects that were assigned to you as a reviewer and the other 10 proposals for which you're a reader. When you click on the project number, you will be able to input your assessments. for each of the objectives. And this is what it will look like. And it's a drop-down menu, which you select your preliminary assessment. You you will only have access to do to assess those that are assigned to you as a reviewer, not for the ones for which you're in conflict or a reader. You do not need to include comments. You will be provided with a template, a report template in which you can add your comments for your use, or you can use whatever other means you need. You do not need to share with the CFI your preliminary comments. However, if you have them handy and are happy to share them with us, we're happy to have them and to have them inform our review. I see that we've added a square, a red square around the save. Once you've entered your preliminary assessments, please make sure that you save. If you do not save, click save, then your assessments will not be visible to us. Once you have clicked save, you will not be able to make further changes. However, if you do wish to make changes, just contact your CFI contact person and we will be able to release it back to you so you can change your assessment if need be. Okay, so the MAC meetings. We've scheduled them over the span of 4 days, with each MAC taking place over 2 sessions. We've decided to have half the MACs take place between the 28th and on the 28th and 30th, and the other half on the 29th and 31st. So this way you have a day between each MAC meeting. We have 13 MACs. Each MAC will be composed of 6 members and 1 chair. Each MAC, as I've already said, will be assigned 20 proposals for review. And we will inform you shortly when we send the CAMS activation if you've been assigned to a committee that will meet on the 28th and 30th or 29th and 31st. If you have a strong preference, could you please let us know as soon as possible? Hopefully not everybody will be available on the same dates and we can disperse the meetings across the 2 meeting dates. I've been asked by several people what time are the meetings. The meetings are about 5.5 hours long, and we schedule them between 10 a.m. Eastern and 3:15, 3:30 p.m. Again, Eastern time, trying to reconcile all the different time zones that we have represented by the MAC members. So what happens at the MAC meeting? Well, each proposal will be reviewed in turn. Will take about 20 to 25 minutes for each review. We will provide a preliminary agenda in the once in CAMS, and we usually just review in consecutive order of project numbers, unless the chair has a specific request or recommendation. We will start the meetings with projects that have major weaknesses in team composition. Again, there'll be only a handful of those, and not all MACs will have them, but that will be the first step for all MACs to decide whether to remove projects with significant weaknesses in team composition. The discussion itself is based on the 3 objectives, competition objectives, and the length of the discussion will depend on whether you're in strong agreement, which is why we ask for your preliminary assessments. If your opinions are aligned and you're looking at the same strengths and weaknesses, the review can take less time than 20 minutes. Or if there's big disparity of opinions, the review might take a little longer than 25 minutes. Thus, not all proposals will require in-depth discussions. We will assign a first reviewer, and a first reviewer doesn't mean that it's a lead reviewer or somebody with a more direct expertise. The only reason we're going to identify the first reviewer is to, so you will not be taken by surprise, and so that the MAC chair will know who to ask for that first go through the proposal, reflections on strengths and weaknesses. Once the first reviewer shares their assessment, the second and third reviewers, they'll be called upon randomly by the MAC chair, and then the floor will be open to all other MAC members who have additional insights or reflections that they would like to share with the committee. We ask that the MAC assessment, as was the expert committee assessment, be based exclusively on the proposal and informed by the expert committee reports. Please don't bring in additional perspectives. We don't ask you to review additional documents, to go on websites or what have you. And we also ask you not to write the proposal for them. So base your assessments exclusively on what was provided in the proposal and be guided by the opinion of the experts. So following the discussion, we will need consensus ratings for each of the three competition criteria, competition objectives, and some comments about the strengths and weaknesses of a project for each of the objectives. If there are strong discrepancies between your assessment and that of the experts, we will need substantive explanations as to why your opinion diverged significantly from that of the experts. Now, given the high standard expected for proposals recommended for funding, and this is an intense competition, we expect you to be very selective. And you don't have a budget as a MAC, but please look only for the projects that are of the highest caliber to be recommended for funding. And as I mentioned, the MAC is the committee that makes funding recommendations. You will have 2 sessions, and at the end of day 2, you're going to see the ratings for all the projects that as you assigned. So the objective ratings for all of them, and you can choose, the MAC can choose up to 2 projects for you deem to be of exceptional merit. And exceptional merit doesn't have to be based exclusively on the ratings. It's not the ones that have all EX. You can think perhaps a high risk, high potential project that you would wish to flag as exceptional rating. So it's up to the MAC to define its selection. It does not have to select 2. It can select 1 or it can select none. And you will need to substantiate why these projects were selected for exceptional merit. These projects are usually not discussed at length, or if at all, by the special MAC. They're usually automatically recommended for funding, but of course the SMAC has a prerogative to decide whether to discuss them briefly or at length. Funding recommendations. So the CFI, because these are infrastructure projects, we prefer to have projects either fully funded or not funded. We're not looking for the committees to remove certain items in order to balance a budget. So your recommendation should be either for full funding or no funding. There are some possibilities for partial or conditional funding, though that ideally it's fund, no fund decision. Partial funding are almost exclusively for situations where the experts have identified some infrastructure items that were not well justified and could be removed without impacting the viability of the project. So if that is the case, then you can remove the items from the competition, from the budget. Conditional funding should be used very rarely or not used at all. And the reason is because conditions are often very difficult to meet. So we ask you not to impose conditions unless they're ones that are reasonable and easy to meet in the short term. So for example, the project is conditional on receiving matching funds from a European funder, and they will find out in 2023, then you can put that as a condition. The reason why we ask you not to assign conditions are twofold. One, as I've mentioned, it's difficult, often very difficult for institutions to meet conditions, but also we don't want to park money. We want to fully fund the best of the projects, and we don't want to be in a precarious situation where some projects perhaps will not meet the conditions, and then the allocated funds will be for naught. And as I said, no funding is a recommendation too. For multi-institutional projects that have 3 or more collaborating institutions, we allow them to request an additional 5% of the CFI amount for administrative reasons such as governance or management or operational needs that are commensurate with the complexity of the project. This is not an automatic assignment. The applicants have to justify the need for the additional O&M. The expert committees also reviewed them, and it is up to the MAC to decide whether sufficient rationale was provided for the additional O&M funds and whether to fund or not fund them. MAC reports are almost at the tail ends. MACs are required, and by MACs are required, that means the CFI staff will be taking notes throughout the meeting. 2 of us will be assigned to each MAC, and we will be supporting the MAC review process, supporting the chair, and taking notes throughout. We will draft the MAC reports and ask the chairs to vet them. So MAC report is 1 page long. It has the consensus ratings for each objective, as well as comments about each of the 3 objectives, strengths and weaknesses. It includes a justification of the funding recommendation, and if the project was deemed to be exceptional, justify the exception, why it was selected as exceptional. Reports for projects that are not recommended funding are much shorter, and often if they are aligned with the assessment of the expert committee, we simply say the MAC was in agreement with the expert committee's assessment based on the following, or and whatever aspects did not necessarily fully align with the expert committee's comments. So, final slide, what to do. Activate your CAMS account, and I know the ball is in our court. We'll be sending you the information very shortly. Complete the unconscious bias training module, especially if you've never taken unconscious bias training. The link to the module is in this deck, as well as in the guidelines for MAC members. Read the proposals and expert committees reports that will be uploaded in your CAMS portal. Review the proposal package. If you haven't had a chance to look at the guidelines, please do so. There will be a preliminary review template available. You can use it to send us a preliminary assessments, that is the ratings, if you cannot do so online through CAMS. A draft agenda will also be available very shortly, as will be a quick reference guide that will provide the alignment between the 6 assessment criteria and the 3 objectives. So conduct the preliminary assessment and provide us with your ratings 1 week before the meetings, that is by March 20th, please. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing the presentation, and Olivier and I will be available to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra, for the presentation. I've answered, I think, all the questions in the chat. I will probably remind everybody of the answers at the end, but now I would like to see if there's other members who want to ask questions. Got one question from Hilding Nelson. Nelson?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm very curious about this equity and team composition component. It's very vague to me, and I want to know, would like to know a little bit more about what would be considered satisfactory to CFI. Would it be if somebody, say in physics, where I'm coming from, if they specify that the team composition is like 80% men, 20% women, which is relatively close to the composition in general in physics in Canada, is that satisfactory, or are we looking for something more? And also, in terms of this equity, what about things like equity to local communities? Like if you're in poor communities versus richer communities, if you're near indigenous, large indigenous communities, is benefit for them? Are these things part of this discussion?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. This is a great question, and I know I probably did not elaborate sufficiently on what our expectations are. So the expert committees also reviewed the team composition, and we relied on their perspectives from the implicated research fields and domains. So for the physics project, the proposals would have been evaluated with that lens of experts from physics domains. We haven't set any targets or benchmarks. We wanted to see a true demonstration of EDI awareness and intentionality in addressing systemic barriers. And of course, we don't expect a team of 10 people or fewer to make significant changes, but we want to see concrete actions. I appreciate your questions about Indigenous research, because we have quite a few proposals, many in the life sciences in particular, that that talk about impacts and truth and reconciliation. The CFI does not have concrete criteria. However, I wanted to ask the MACs that when you see such proposals, ask yourself, have they taken the right steps? Are they taking the right approaches? For example, are they using a colonialist view by saying we will survey, that bringing the Western perspective, we will tell them what to do? Or is it a true collaboration, co-production? Is it respectful? So we really want to say that if they do talk about EDI, if they do talk about Indigenous research, that the appropriate people are involved, the appropriate communities are engaged, and the proposal reflects that and has the appropriate plans in place. I also wanted to mention that we will have 1 or 2 committee members in each MAC that have strong EDI awareness, that are EDI advisors or advocates or champions at their institutions. So we don't leave you on your own. We will have some internal or additional perspectives for each of the MACs. So I hope that answered your question.
Now we've got a question from Valérie Mizrahi.
Hi, thank you very much for this very informative presentation. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa. So I have really 2 questions. One is informed by my own experience being on other panels where I'm reviewing for research that's funded in another country that I'm not that familiar with. And different funders adopt a different view with respect to the balance of the person or the team in this case versus the quality of the research. Could you give me a sense, because I don't really have a feeling yet as to how those are weighted. I heard with interest that you said don't try to average across the various criteria, but would one have a case to be made if the research proposal is really compelling, but there are elements of the team other than DEI that are wanting. Is that going to be something that's still in frame? So that's my first question. And with time, I might come up with some other questions, but I'd appreciate clarity on that. Thank you.
So, Olivier, I'm going to field this one to you, please.
I was answering some question on the chat. Could you quickly repeat it for me?
Okay. So we say that the three objectives are equivalent. All three must be met, and excellence has to be demonstrated across all three. But we also have to be realistic that if the proposed research is not world-class, and if the team that is put in place does not have the full expertise to carry out the research objectives, then that's probably a major weakness. It's that will impact the full proposal, the review of the full proposal. So that first objective, we don't say that it weighs more, but certainly that is of the most critical importance, having the very best of the research or technology development that Canada can produce and in the hands of the right people.
Indeed, it's certainly a problem if the research program or the team are not as satisfactory as the committee would like. But again, if you see weaknesses in either of the other criteria, it's sufficient for the committee to not recommend funding for the proposal.
Thank you.
Now a questions from Vitrina Diamet.
I'm saying I have got a couple of two small questions. The first one is about the saving you are talking about, that when you save and then you cannot access unless you request. But sometimes when you are working on a report, you usually save and to continue later. So I was just asking about this. Does it mean that once you start filling for report for a proposal, you have to finish before you save? That is one question. The second question is about when you are talking about the funding infrastructure, I did not get you quite well about no funding. What would be the situation, for instance, would be like, for no funding for infrastructure? I did not get it quite well.
So Cam's question is to you, Olivier. I think unless you have entered all three ratings, you will continue to have access. You will lose access only once you have all three. Is this correct?
That's correct. So as long as you save for each criteria that you have the rating, you can continue later. You cannot continue if at the end of the process you click on the confirm button, sending it to CFI. That said, most members will start doing their review, offline, and when they're ready to input all their ratings, they do it at the same time.
And I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the second question. So Olivier, can you fill that, please?
It was about the funding for infrastructure. There was full funding, there was partial, and then there was no funding. I did not. Yes, yeah, I don't get the situation for no funding.
Yeah, I can give you. I can start, Sandra, if you want.
Go ahead.
So basically, full funding. Obviously, committee want to recommend funding. Partial funding, we usually do it if in the committee report you've got information that some portion of the project are not well justified and should not be funded. It could be for administrative reason where they are requesting something that is not eligible, but it will be flagged in the report all by the CFI staff. And the other case is when in a report, the expert tell you that there's a portion not recommended for funding. The no funding decision from the committee is really based on the ratings that the committee will give for the three objectives. And when the committee considers that the ratings are too low, that's when we don't recommend funding.
Okay, so it is only for the infrastructure, it's not for the whole proposal.
Exactly. At CFI, we only fund research infrastructure. That's on those elements that we need your approval or your recommendation. Now we've got the question from Jessica Shadian.
Yes, I see we're sorry, excuse me for a second, Dr. Shadian. I just want to mention there are quite a few questions accumulating in the chat, so maybe we can address those after we hear your questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure, and one of those, maybe someone kind of asked a similar question, and those questions, because it's this idea about, well, it has to benefit all of Canada, but also, you know, globally. And there's talk about, you know, having, you know, international relevance. So do the teams, possibly some do, some don't. Is it better if teams include then international partners in the proposals? And then I have a second question. Do all like, I don't know, like the PI or whoever does is the main entity that submits the proposal, do all of those people always have PhDs? I'm just trying to get an idea about the composition of the teams themselves and this relationship or between, you know, PhD researchers and then other types of I don't know, institutions, persons, community members. This kind of goes back to the equity and the inclusion piece, and how to, okay, it's not enough to say you're going to, you know, interview people that are Indigenous or something, but so is there any sort of mechanism or way that something that's in the proposal that says, okay, what's the composition? We're looking for a certain composition of what types of members are on a research submission.
Yeah.
Or
yeah. So you will see that the teams can take on very different compositions. They can be institutional teams, they can be multi-institutional teams. Invariably, they are Canadian researchers. We allow applicants to put in up to 10 individuals for the core team and add an additional 20 names for other users who are collaborators or partners. And really whether this is the right composition, we don't impose a composition. If they have international members and it's a project of international scope, as many projects are, then that holds them in good stead if they demonstrate that they have international members. But there are also projects that are of great regional significance or Canadian significance, and therefore there's no expectation that they have international collaborations. When we talk about international competitiveness, this is one of the aspects that the proponents need to demonstrate in the proposal, in the research and technology development section. Some have done it exceptionally well, others perhaps not as well. And in terms of benefits to Canadians, of course, because the CFI funds are Canadian funds, we're looking to have impact on our nation. However, for the vast majority of benefits can be global benefits, especially ones, for example, that have to do with health. And they don't need to straddle all the full gamut of benefits. It can be environmental and or social or socioeconomic. So it really is context dependent.
That's helpful. Because in other realms of being a reviewer, sometimes it's all made up of PhD students, or I'm sorry, PhDs, people with PhDs, and actually that's maybe a question as well. Is there anything about future generation of
Okay, so I didn't answer all your questions, but you will see again the teams, because these are projects, there are multi-million-dollar projects, and institutions only get to submit these kind of requests every couple of years. Inevitably, they put their best foot forward, and with not necessarily the most senior, but often they have senior researchers. As part of the team composition, we want to see a mix of career stages, and I think most of our proposals strongly demonstrated that there is a mix and inclusion of early career researchers. Some institutions demanded that early career researchers be part of the team before this, in order to submit these proposals to the CFI. It's not often that you will see a postdoc or a graduate student as part of the team. However, training of HQP, of highly qualified personnel, is one of the aspects that applicants should address, at least in their section about benefits to Canadians.
Now a question from Louise.
You mentioned that we should not go for averaging criteria, but for the case of the benefits, you also mentioned that they don't have to go for the full gamut and cover all aspects. However, I'm wondering if we should take into account that for environmental impact or sustainability or even health impact, it's difficult to admit that you could have something that is really not good for the environment and therefore use like a compensatory approach, saying, or if you have a very good economical benefit, then it's okay if you ruin the environment. So is there a provision to not allow that kind of decision?
Wow. Well, VM, sending this to you, that's a very good question.
Could you repeat it for me? Because I was still on the written chat. It's everywhere.
I'm wondering if in the benefits, if you mentioned that you don't have to cover all the benefits all the time, but should we look for dangerous situations? For example, if the financial benefits are very high, but the environmental impacts could be nil or even negative.
Yeah.
Then can we then decide that no, this is not the way?
That's a good question. One of the most common and important benefit would be the training of highly qualified personnel. So each proposal should be able to give you information on that, and the expert committee should have commented about it. In terms of larger benefits for Canada, we should keep in mind that we're funding research here. So concrete benefits usually takes many years to manifest themselves. So really at this point, we're looking for each proposal to express what could be the benefits, but also describe what is their research result transfer plan to move the research result toward benefits. That's what we are looking for. So for most proposals, you should have benefits in only one of the areas. So maybe health benefit, maybe economic benefits as a transfer rate technology to the private sector. Could be social benefits, could be environmental benefits. We don't expect proposal to have a negative impact on the environment at this point, but we are not in a position, let's say, to assess, for example, the carbon footprint of what we will fund. That's not yet part of our review process, but it probably will in the future.
Can I just ask a very quick one? Mm-hmm. For multi-institutional projects, the 5% that could be added or requested for operation and maintenance, is it 5% of the CFI amount?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thanks. It will be in the proposal, and it should have been validated by the expert committee, because sometimes some applicants made some mistake in the calculation.
Yes.
So obviously we'll validate that for you before the meeting.
Thank you.
Maybe another question from Jessica, but I don't know if it's an old hand.
Oh, no. Sorry, I have to undo my hand.
Good. So what I can do, I can maybe quickly summarize the answer I gave on the chat to the benefit of everybody. Let me have a look. There was a few questions. So about the team composition, EDI criterion. If the first step is to confirm if you validate that there's weaknesses that are significant, And if you give a partially satisfied or not satisfied rating, the committee should indeed remove those projects from the competition. So in terms of meeting dates, it will be 2 dates among March 28th, 29th, 30th, or 31st. And each committee will meet for 2 days for 2 5-hour period. So we will confirm that as soon as we assign people to MAC committees, and it will be ready, I believe, Sandra, for when we will give access in CAMS to everybody,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, so same question here. At this point, if you want to contact us about anything we discussed today or anything you will think about in the short term, I've put in the chat the email address overall of the program, of the competition. So it's 2023IF@innovation.ca. But as soon as you know who will be the CFI staff person in charge of your committee, it will be that person. And obviously, when it will be known, this person will manifest himself or herself to you. Exceptional project, it's maximum of 2 by committee. It's usually decided at the end of the committee when all projects have been reviewed, and it could be considered as the 2 best projects as identified by the committee. The CFI staff will also contact directly the committee chair, and in order to to look at the preliminary ratings together and try to plan how they will proceed during the meeting. Research infrastructure, I gave a definition, but I will repeat it here. So what we fund is the acquisition or development of research infrastructure. So it could be equipment, warranties associated with equipment, software, computing hardware, communication hardware, laboratory furnitures. Could also be the initial training of people who will operate the equipment. Could be personnel costs needed to develop the infrastructure. It could include construction renovation to house the equipment, and could also be development of a database to the point it's ready for the research community to use. Extra 5%, it's really for a large multi-institutional project. And what we want to cover here with this extra 5% is extra admin or management costs needed due to the complexity of those multi-institutional projects. The maximum amount for each proposal is already in the proposal. So obviously that's the maximum amount we can recommend. And if the committee wants to go with partial funding, well, we'll need to have what is this amount of partial funding. In terms of intellectual property associated with the research, so CFI doesn't own any intellectual property. So basically it's based on each institution policy, and right, so it's defined by each institution. So benefits, obviously, the first thing we need to assess is benefits for Canada and Canadian, and it's defined at large. So I talked about, highly qualified personnel, transferring technology to the private sector. Those are examples. So most projects, the benefits will be, somewhat narrow to their field. If there's some benefits outside of Canada, it's a bonus, but it's not mandatory. We will collate the question and answer here, and we can send indeed a list of those questions and answer to all of you. International competitiveness, it will have been assessed by the expert committee, so you should have information in the report to confirm that to you. Question from, I see it in the chat, from Michael Ryan, asking if we can send placeholders for the March committee meetings. The decision should be taken quickly soon, but I believe we can certainly do that. I will ask someone from the team to send you placeholders for those 4 days. We can certainly do that after the meeting. I will even ask it right now.
So we can send placeholders for all four, but if you give us 2 weeks until first week of February, then we will send meeting invitations in addition to the CAMS activation email. We will send you a meeting invitation so you can block your calendar for the 2 sessions that for your Mac.
Good. One last question in the chat, and then I'll go to someone else live. So we will indeed assign proposal to each one of you. That will be available as soon as we give you access in our CAMS system. Exactly. So we will assign proposal to everybody. If you want to read all the other proposal, obviously you're invited to do so. But in reality, some members will only look quickly at the other proposal. But I would encourage everybody to read all the committee reports. They are not that long, and it's a good way to give you an overall portrait of the proposal in your committee. Thank you, Mathieu, for providing answers that are, I'm glad to see it along with mine.
I see a really good question
Wonderful.
about French proposals, which so there are 2 salient answers that I did not share. I think I mentioned that Quebec has a parallel review process, committee review process, and they will inform us by February 23rd, I believe, which of their projects are going to proceed to the MAC. So when you get the CAMS activation information on your review assignment, we will flag the projects that are from Quebec and ask you that you review them last in case any of them are withdrawn before the time, before the MAC meetings.
I've got other people. Do you want me to ask other people to ask questions?
Sure. I just want to mention that there will be proposals in French, a handful of them, and those will be assigned exclusively to bilingual and francophone expert committee members. The review will be done in the language in which the proposal was submitted, or at least by those who can read in the language in which the proposal was submitted. Go ahead, Olivier.
Good. We've got now a question from Elisabeth Anne Bukusi.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive information provided. I wanted to get a sense of how long are these proposals, and do you have an estimated amount of time you think it will take for individuals to review? Because if 10 are assigned as a reviewer and 10 as a reader, and the amount of time that you'll be giving us for review, I just wanted to get a sense of the time commitment that this will require. Thank you very much. Over.
Yeah. So we are in our invitation letters, we try to be very frank that this is a big time commitment, because we certainly don't want you to be surprised when you see the proposals. The proposals are long. They can be maybe 80 to 100 pages long. To consider, the proposal itself is about 30 pages long. Then there's a lot of, there's a budget and infrastructure and CVs. Those are looked at much more closely by the expert committees rather than MAC members. So in practice, if you're a reviewer, you will read the proposal itself, not necessarily all the associated appendices and budgets. You will have the you will have the expert reviewer's perspective on that. The expert committee reports are about 5 or 6 pages long. When you're going to see them, the templates are very long, but the actual content is about 4 or 5 pages. So there's about half a page for each of the 6 assessment criteria. So please don't panic when you see how voluminous the information is. In the past, we used to send giant boxes to reviewers. I'm glad you're not getting materials in a giant box. So read carefully. And as Olivier said, for the 10 proposals for each year reader, it is not our expectation that you go through the full material. There is a 3-page project summary for each proposal. Read that and be guided by the expert committee review.
Good. Now let me ask Hassan Virgi.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you. Thank you very much. This is very useful, informative, and I'm excited to be a part of this adventure. I had a few thoughts and I would like your clarification on that. Since the, pardon me, since the emphasis is on the Canadian Fund for Innovation, would you please kindly tell us out of your past experience of the funding, an example or two of very innovative efforts that were funded, and how did you set up an ongoing CFI assessment as a projects proceed both now or in future, so that you can have a sense of where one might do course correction or adjustments or additional funding requirements or policy changes or whatever else that is required. The other part of my thought was that, and this is based on an experience, long experience in working at the US National Science Foundation, that there are indeed proposals that often get not such high rating and yet have elements of very innovative things that if funded could lead to very large returns on investment. And so I'm wondering where in CFI such thought processes occur. Is it in the special committees, the expert committees, the overall committees, or back at home in your headquarters?
I can answer that, Sandra, if you want. The innovation potential of each project will already have been assigned by each expert committee. So you will have this information in the committee report, expert committee report. So basically, I mean, most of the work of the committee is based on the report provided by the expert committee. That's your starting point, and you use that information to make your assessment for each objective.
Okay.
But if I may add, sometimes a project is not necessarily, exceeds across the board, but the idea is really exciting. And so on occasion, the MAC can identify a high risk, high reward, high potential project that perhaps is not, as showy as other projects. And it is the Innovation Fund where such projects will come to light. We have other funding processes and other funds and competitions, but I think for what you're thinking about, this is the place to be.
Thank you very much. This is very useful. That's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah. And is there within CFI a process for ongoing assessments of currently funded projects so that you can tease out of it where there might be potential for broadly making changes that would benefit early returns on the investment? Maybe that's too broad a question. Reason why I ask is that I'm involved with a very large effort between Belmont Forum, the European Union and others on sustainable urbanization global initiative, within which we established at the beginning of the funding of the projects an expert committee to review and think about where broader impacts and innovations might accrue out of the funded activities, and thereby one could assess the total return on investments made.
Yeah, well, that's a good question for which we don't have a great answer. We have fantastic stories. Our communications team would be very happy to share those. We have, our website has numerous stories about success stories of projects that were funded. Some of these successes may have been the shorter or longer term. I cannot vouch for that. In terms of tracking, we have project progress reports, but those are several years into project implementation, and that's not necessarily where the stories will come from unless the research team made particular discoveries that they wish to share with the public. So I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for what you are particularly seeking in this case.
I may have another question for you, Sandra. Have the EDI champions been identified yet? Are they aware of their roles?
I didn't want to answer that because the answer is no, not yet. Dr. Austin, maybe we can talk offline and see whether we should identify the people. And when I say EDI champions, we have people who are very much at the forefront of EDI advocacy in Canada and internationally, as well as people with lived experiences and Indigenous research, for example. But I didn't want to put a certain onus on them. I would prefer that people used their knowledge, their experience for the discussions. But if you think that we should flag those people that, in our opinion, can bring those additional perspectives, we will consider that.
Oh, I think I'll let Janine Austin go ahead, because I think it was your question initially, so maybe it's a follow-up.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks ever so much for responding to that. So I've participated in MAC assessments before, yes. And the need for having EDI champions on committees as a result of that experience feels quite clear to me. However, having that role on a committee is hard because you're putting yourself in the firing line for people that don't like to hear the messages that you're conveying. So there is risk to the people that if we do identify people to take on that role at the committee level, there's risk to them. So my suggestion to CFI had been that if we were going to do that, and I think there's potential value in doing that, we would also need to connect the EDI champions from across committees with each other for like mutual support and discussions about how to handle things and so on. So I think, you know, if the EDI domain is going to be actioned as critically foundationally important as it seems to be, I don't think it's enough to just ask the members of the committees to do the unconscious bias training. I mean, I understand that we can't really do more than ask that. But given my experience on other committees where people have been asked to review that material in advance and seen the way that EDI stuff has been discussed, it's not sufficient. So that's where my comments here are coming from. I think that there are definitely risks with having EDI champions, but also I think if we're going to action it properly, there might be a need for them, but we would need to support them if we use it. And I'll leave it there.
I appreciate your comments, and we will follow up offline because you were one of the catalysts for the CFI's EDI steps towards implementing this criterion, and we very much appreciate your support and your ideas. So we'll follow up soon.
Okay, let me see if I see. Maybe let's say Hiding Nielsen, is it maybe a new question, right? I believe.
Hi, thank you. Just to follow up on this EDI champion thing, is there any plans to compensate or give credit in any way to the champions? This is extra labor on top of a very demanding workload. So is there any sense of not just support for each other, but compensation for time put in and expertise?
So since this is a first that we've thought of this, and we're not good at operating, making changes in real time, we have not considered compensation. And again, I'm a little, I don't want to add to the workload that is already a significant workload for any of the committee members. So this is not a no, this is not a yes, this is, we will need to discuss how we view the role? Will there be additional responsibilities for those of you who have that strong EDI awareness and may bring additional insights?
Okay, thank you, everybody. I believe we've got all the answer in the chat, answer in writing. Nobody else want to ask question. So again, what we'll do for the written questions, we can indeed send you the responses by email, and we will do so.
I think we have 1 minute to end. For those of you who are still online, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the excellent questions. Thank you so much for contributing to the 2023 Innovation Fund MAC. I think for those of you who have served in past MACs, people keep coming back. It's a great experience. I hope you will enjoy it as previous MACs have, and looking forward to seeing you in March. But until then, you will have contact people at the CFI, and we're here to support you in any way we can. So thank you and have a great day. And thanks so much, Olivier, for fielding numerous questions.
So thank you, everybody. It's a really an important process for us and for Canada. So looking forward to meet people who will be in my committee, in my MAC.